The badge my husband wore over his heart used to be my symbol of safety, the ultimate proof that I was protected, cherished, and loved. But as I stood frozen on the sidewalk, watching him grind his heavy tactical boot into the neck of a man who hadn't even raised his voice, I realized the man I shared a bed with was a monster hiding behind a wall of polished silver. What I didn't know in that suffocating moment was that the drifter he was tormenting was actually recording every slur and every strike, and that my husband's career wasn't the only thing about to be incinerated. Our entire marriage was a carefully constructed lie designed to strip me of my inheritance and my sanity. Before that afternoon, my life in Oak Creek felt like a scene from a vintage postcard. We lived in the Blackwood Estate, a sprawling Victorian house with a wraparound porch that my great-grandfather had built with his own hands. It was the kind of house that breathed history, smelling of aged cedar, floor wax, and the lavender bushes my mother had planted 30 years ago. Every morning, the sunlight would filter through the stained glass transom above the front door, casting patterns of ruby and sapphire across the hardwood floors. It was my sanctuary, the only piece of my parents I had left. Mark was the town's golden boy. When he'd proposed to me 3 years ago, the whole community seemed to exhale in collective approval. He was Officer Mark Miller, the decorated hero who had saved a child from a house fire and coached the local Little League team. He was handsome in a rugged, dependable way, with a jawline that looked carved from granite and eyes the color of a stormy sea. In those early days, his protectiveness felt like a warm blanket. He'd insist on checking the locks twice every night, and he'd wrap his arms around me from behind while I brewed our morning coffee, whispering that he'd do anything to keep me safe in this crumbling world. "You're too soft, Sarah," he'd often say, his voice a low rumble against my ear as we sat on the porch swing. "The world out there, it's not like it used to be. There are people who look at a woman like you, in a house like this, and they see a target. Thank God you have me to stand at the gate." I would just lean into him, inhaling the scent of his expensive aftershave and the faint metallic tang of his duty belt. I felt lucky. I felt chosen. My father had died, leaving me the house and the 50 acres of prime timberland surrounding it, but he'd also left me with a crushing sense of loneliness. Mark filled that void. He took over the heavy lifting of the estate, the taxes, the maintenance, the legalities of the land trust, leaving me to my painting and my garden. "Don't worry your pretty head about the surveyors or the zoning boards, honey," he'd tell me, tossing a thick folder onto the mahogany desk in the study. "I'm handling it. We're going to make sure this place stays in the family forever. Just trust me." And I did. I trusted him with my life, my history, and every cent of the life insurance payout my father had left behind. The first time I noticed a shift in the atmosphere was a Tuesday in early October. The air was crisp, smelling of wood smoke and turning leaves. Mark was usually the picture of professional calm, but lately he'd been coming home with a jagged edge to his movements. He'd paced the kitchen floor, his fingers drummed a frantic rhythm on the counter, and his conversations with his mother, Evelyn, had become hushed and frequent. Evelyn was a woman made of vinegar and starch. She lived in a smaller house on the edge of town, but she treated the Blackwood estate as if she already held the deed. She'd come over unannounced, running a gloved finger over my bookshelves to check for dust, her lips thinned into a line of perpetual disappointment. "It's a lot of house for a girl like you to manage, Sarah," she'd say, her voice dripping with a fake, sugary concern. "Mark is exhausted. He's out there keeping the peace, and then he has to come home and worry about the roof leaks and the property taxes. It's a burden he shouldn't have to carry alone." "It's my house, Evelyn," I'd remind her, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm the one paying the taxes. Mark just helps with the paperwork." Evelyn would let out a sharp, mocking little laugh. "Paperwork? Oh, darling, you have no idea what it takes to protect an asset like this. You're lucky Mark is as patient as he is. Most men wouldn't put up with such inefficiency." I'd look to Mark for support, but he would just shrug, his eyes fixed on his phone. "Mom's just worried about us, Sarah. This land is worth a lot of money. People are starting to notice. We have to be careful." There was a new tone in his voice lately, a cold, transactional quality that made the hair on my arms stand up. He started talking more about the changing demographics of the nearby city and how the wrong element was starting to drift into Oak Creek. He became obsessed with the idea of vagrants and outsiders. He installed high-tech security cameras that fed directly to his phone, and he'd spend hours in the dark, staring at the glowing screen, watching the perimeter of our woods. "I saw a guy today," he muttered one night, his face illuminated by the blue light of the monitor. "Filthy, scruffy beard, army surplus jacket, hanging around the trailhead near our north fence. I gave him a taste of what happens to trespassers in this town." "Mark, it's a public trailhead," I said softly, setting my book aside. "Maybe he was just hiking." Mark turned to me, and for a split second, the mask of the loving husband slipped. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and filled with a terrifying, righteous fury. "He was trash, Sarah, and I don't want trash near my property. Do you understand? I'm cleaning up this town, one piece of filth at a time." The way he said, "my property," sent a chill through my chest that no amount of tea could warm. I told myself it was just the stress of the job. I told myself he was protective because he loved me. I clung to the image of the man who had proposed to me under the oak trees, ignoring the fact that the man sitting in front of me was starting to look more like a warden than a husband. I didn't realize that the drifter he was so obsessed with was about to become the catalyst for the total destruction of the world I thought I knew. The whispers began about a month after the incident at the trailhead. It started with small, jarring inconsistencies that I tried to file away under stress or misunderstanding. One afternoon, I found a notice from the county tax assessor on the kitchen island. It was marked "past due." I felt a prickle of confusion. I had given Mark the check for the property taxes 3 weeks prior. When I asked him about it that evening, he didn't even look up from his dinner. "Oh, that? Just a clerical error at the courthouse, Sarah," he said, his voice flat and dismissive. "I went down there today and straightened it all out. Don't go poking through the mail, honey. I told you, I'm handling the estate." "But it says they're going to place a lien if it isn't paid by Friday," I persisted, my heart beginning a slow, heavy thud. Mark slammed his fork down. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet kitchen. "I said I handled it. Do you not trust me? After everything I do to keep this place running, you're going to grill me over a piece of paper." I recoiled, the apology rising to my lips out of habit. "I'm sorry, Mark. I didn't mean. I just got worried." He sighed, his face softening into that practiced mask of weary heroism. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand, his grip just a fraction too tight. "I know. It's okay. I'm just under a lot of pressure at the precinct. There's a lot of tension in town lately. That drifter I told you about? He's still lurking. I see him every day, sitting on the bench outside the pharmacy, watching people. He's a parasite, Sarah, and he's not the only one. I'm trying to keep the rot from spreading to our doorstep." I saw the drifter myself 2 days later. I was coming out of the grocery store when I spotted him. He was a tall man, middle-aged, with skin the color of deep mahogany and a beard peppered with silver. He was wearing a faded olive jacket and sitting quietly on a public bench, reading a paperback book. He didn't look like a parasite. He looked like a man enjoying the autumn sun. Then I saw Mark's cruiser pull up. I stood by my car, hidden by a row of SUVs, and watched. Mark didn't just walk up to him. He stalked. He hovered over the man, his hand resting menacingly on his service weapon. Even from 30 yards away, I could hear the harsh, jagged tone of Mark's voice, though I couldn't make out the words. The man on the bench didn't flinch. He looked up, his expression calm, almost analytical. Mark kicked the man's duffel bag, spilling a thermos and some clothes onto the pavement. A wave of nausea rolled through me. This wasn't protecting the town. This was a schoolyard bully with a badge. When Mark finally drove off, the man slowly stood up, began gathering his things, and for a fleeting second, his eyes met mine. There was no anger in them, only a strange, steady patience that made me feel like He was the one who knew a secret, and I was the one who was lost. That night, the house felt different. The walls of Blackwood Estate, which had always felt like a warm embrace, suddenly felt like they were closing in. Mark was in his study, the door locked, which was becoming a frequent occurrence. I heard him talking on the phone, not his work phone, but a burner he thought I didn't know about. "No, Evelyn, she doesn't suspect a thing," he hissed, his voice muffled by the heavy oak door. "The signatures are being processed. Once the timber rights are sold, the land value drops enough for the restructuring. We just need another 2 weeks. Just keep her distracted. Take her to lunch, talk about her mother, whatever it takes." I froze in the hallway, my hand hovering over the floral wallpaper. Signatures? Timber rights? Restructuring? My father had left the timberland in a strict trust that required my express consent for any sale. My blood turned to ice. I waited until I heard Mark go into the shower, the rhythmic thrum of the water providing a veil for my movements. I crept into his study. The room smelled of gun oil and stale coffee. I went straight to the mahogany desk, my father's desk, and began to hunt. I tried the top drawers, nothing but pens and department memos. I tried the bottom file cabinet, locked. But I knew Mark. He was arrogant. He kept the key in the antique humidor on the bookshelf. My fingers trembled so violently I almost dropped the key as I slid it into the lock. The drawer slid open with a soft, metallic groan. I flipped through the folders. Insurance, car, precinct records. And then, at the very back, a plain manila folder with no label. I pulled it out and spread the contents onto the desk. The first thing I saw was my own name. It was a power of attorney document. My breath hitched. As I scanned the lines, the world began to tilt. It gave Mark full authority over my finances, the estate, and the land trust. But it was the signature at the bottom that stopped my heart. It looked exactly like mine, the slight loop on the S, the way I trailed off at the end. But I had never signed this. I had never even seen it. Underneath it was a sales agreement for the 50 acres of timberland. The buyer was E&M Holdings, a shell company I'd never heard of, but the E and M screamed Evelyn and Mark. They were buying my own land from me for a fraction of its value, using a forged document to bypass the trust. Then I found the most devastating piece of all. It was a psychiatric evaluation form, partially filled out in Mark's handwriting. He was documenting episodes of confusion, memory loss, and paranoia on my part. He was building a case to have me declared incompetent. The physical reaction was instantaneous. My vision blurred into a tunnel of white light. A high-pitched ringing erupted in my ears, drowning out the sound of the shower upstairs. I felt a surge of heat crawl up my neck, followed by a cold sweat that turned my skin clammy. My stomach cramped so hard I had to lean against the desk to keep from vomiting. Everything was a lie. The protectiveness, the safety, the love. It was all a tactical maneuver. He wasn't guarding the gate, he was dismantling the house from the inside while I slept. "Looking for something, Sarah?" The voice was like a lash across my back. I spun around, clutching the forged documents to my chest. Mark was standing in the doorway, his hair damp, wearing a white t-shirt and his police trousers. He wasn't angry. He was smiling, a thin, predatory curve of the lips that didn't reach his cold, dead eyes. "Mark," I whispered, my voice sounding like it was coming from underwater. "What is this? You forged my name. You're trying to steal my father's land." He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him with a soft, final click. He looked at the papers in my hand and then back at me, his expression shifting into one of mock pity. "See? This is exactly what I was talking about in the report," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "You're confused, honey. You signed those weeks ago. You told me you wanted to simplify our lives. Now you're having another one of your spells. Give me the papers, Sarah, before you hurt yourself." He took a step toward me, reaching out a hand. In that moment, I didn't see my husband. I saw the man who had kicked the drifter's bag. I saw a predator who had spent years grooming his prey. My legs felt like lead, but as he moved closer, a spark of pure, unadulterated terror ignited something else deep inside me. I realized that if I gave him those papers, I would never leave this house again. "Give me the folder, Sarah," Mark repeated, his voice dropping an octave, becoming that low, dangerous rumble he used on suspects. He didn't move fast. He moved like a hunter who knew the exit was blocked. "You're having an episode."
You're stressed. I've been trying to protect you from the reality of our finances. But your mind, it's just not holding on to things lately. I am not confused, Mark. I am looking at your handwriting on a document that claims I'm mentally unstable, I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat, raw and jagged. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack them. I backed away, my hip hitting the edge of my father's heavy desk. "And this signature, I never signed this. This is a felony. You're a police officer, for God's sake." Mark's face didn't twitch. He just kept coming, his hand outstretched. "I am a police officer. Who do you think the judge is going to believe? A decorated sergeant or a woman with a documented history of memory gaps and emotional outbursts, whose own husband has been desperately trying to keep her out of a psych ward?" A cold, paralyzing dread washed over me. He hadn't just forged a document. He had been laying a trail of breadcrumbs for months, probably talking to his friends on the force, his superiors, maybe even our family doctor, painting a picture of a wife who was slowly losing her grip on reality. Every time I'd forgotten where I put my keys, every time I'd been tired or tearful, he'd been recording it, twisting it into a weapon. The door to the study creaked open further, and Evelyn stepped in. She didn't look shocked to find me holding the evidence of their crimes. She looked bored. She was holding a glass of iced tea, the ice cubes clinking softly, a domestic, suburban sound that felt obscene in the middle of this nightmare. "Really, Sarah, you're making such a scene," Evelyn said, her voice smooth and venomous. "Mark is only doing what's necessary. This house is a relic. It's draining our resources. Selling the timber rights is the only way to clear the complications." "What complications?" I gasped, my eyes darting between them. "The estate is debt-free. It was left to me clear and simple." Evelyn glanced at Mark, a flicker of irritation crossing her face. "Tell her, Mark. Tell her why we need the money so urgently that we can't wait for her permission." Mark's bravado seemed to falter for a split second. He wouldn't look at me. He stared at the brass lamp on the desk, his jaw working. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. "Mark," I whispered, "what did you do?" He didn't do anything but try to provide for a wife who spends her days painting pictures while the world moves on, Evelyn snapped, stepping closer. "But Mark has a hobby, a very expensive one. And it turns out the people he owes money to don't care about his badge. They want the $250,000 he lost in their private games and month." The second twist hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. The Nancy returned, more violent this time. My husband wasn't just a thief. He was a desperate gambler who had collateralized my inheritance to pay off criminals. "Is that true?" I asked, looking at Mark. He still wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stood there, his shoulders hunched, the Colden boy of Oak Creek looking like a snow, pathetic shadow. "You gambled away my father's legacy." "I was going to win it back, Sarah," Mark finally burst out, his voice cracking with a desperate, ugly energy. "I had a streak. I just needed a little more capital to turn it around. And this house, it's just wood and stone. We can keep the house. We're just selling the trees. What does it matter? It matters because it's mine, I shouted, and you storm it. Technically, Evelyn interjected, pointing at the folder in my hand. You're over it over. And if you try to go to the authorities, Mark's friends at the precinct will make sure that your breakdown is handled waking very publicly. You'll goes down the scort your breath of attorney over everything. Who of them? The mother who had raised a monster, and the monster himself. I felt a sudden, strange clarity. The world didn't feel with your spinning anymore. It felt like it had stopped entirely. I saw the way mother were looking at his mother, waiting for her to tell him what to do. He worse the food by come was of puppet. Suddenly, Mark's police radio crackled on his belt, the static-filled voice of the bottom cutting through the tension. All units, we have a report of a suspicious individual trespassing on the Blackwood Future, North Future. Officer Morning. Mark, did you come in? Marks, he looked at the radio, a dark, opportunistic glint returning to his eyes. I saw.
And this time he's trying to break into the shed. I'm responding now. Send backup. He looked at me, a cold smile spreading across his face. You see, Sarah, this is how it works. There's a dangerous vagrant on the property. Things are going to get very chaotic. And in the chaos, people get hurt. People lose things. Documents get lost. Witnesses get discredited. He stepped toward me, and this time, he didn't reach for the papers. He grabbed my upper arm in a grip that I knew would leave purple bruises by morning. You're going to stay here with Mom, and when I come back, we're going to burn that folder, and you're going to sign the rest of the papers. If you don't, well, I'd hate for you to get caught in the crossfire of me arresting a dangerous criminal. He shoved me toward Evelyn, who caught me with surprising strength, her cold fingers digging into my shoulders. Mark grabbed his duty belt, checked his weapon, and stormed out of the room, the heavy thud of his boots echoing down the hallway. I stood there, pinned by his mother, listening to the front door slam. My mind was racing. He was going to use that man, the man from the bench, as a distraction or a scapegoat. He might even kill him, just to prove how dangerous the world was and how much I needed his protection. Don't even think about it, Sarah, Evelyn hissed in my ear. It's over. You lost the moment you let him handle the books. I looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel afraid of her. I felt a cold, sharp rage that was more powerful than any fear. You think you've won, I said, my voice low and steady. But you forgot one thing, Evelyn. And what's that? She sneered. This is my father's house, I said, my hand sliding into the pocket of my cardigan, where I felt the cold metal of my phone. And I know every inch of it, including where the silent alarm is. I didn't wait for her reaction. I slammed my elbow into her ribs with every ounce of strength I had, felt her grip loosen as she gasped in pain, and I bolted for the back stairs. I didn't just need to save my house. I needed to save that man outside before Mark turned his badge into a license to murder. I didn't run for the front door. I knew Mark would be watching the driveway. Instead, I tore through the servants' passage behind the kitchen, my breath coming in shallow, ragged stabs. As I burst out into the cool night air, the familiar scent of damp earth and pine needles hit me. But it didn't bring comfort. It felt like a graveyard. I pulled my phone from my pocket, my fingers flying over the screen. I didn't call the local police. I knew half of them were on Mark's bowling team. I called David Miller, no relation to Mark, a retired state prosecutor and one of my father's oldest friends. David, it's Sarah, I whispered.
ducking behind a massive hydrangea bush as I saw the sweep of a flashlight near the Northwoods. I have proof of forgery, grand larceny, and a conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. Mark is on the property right now. He's going to hurt someone. A man. An innocent man. You have to send the state troopers, not the local boys, please. Sarah, slow down. David's voice was a calm anchor in the storm. Where are the documents? I have them. I'm recording everything now, I said, hitting the video record button and holding the phone like a shield. Just hurry. I crept toward the north fence, the click in my mind finally settling into a cold, hard resolve. The woman who had let Mark handle the paperwork was dead. She had died the moment I saw that forged signature. In her place was someone who understood that the only person coming to save me was me. I reached the clearing near the old equipment shed. The moonlight was bright enough to see the scene unfolding like a nightmare in high definition. Mark was there, his back to me, his shoulders hunched in that aggressive, predatory stance. And there was the man, the drifter. He was kneeling on the ground, his hands behind his head. You think you can just wander onto my land and eye my property? Mark's voice was a guttural snarl, stripped of all its polished, golden boy charm. I told you what happens to your kind in this town. You're a cockroach, and I'm about to step on you. He used a racial slur so foul, it made my blood run cold. Then I watched as Mark reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, clear plastic bag filled with white powder. He dropped it into the man's open duffel bag. There, Mark hissed. Possession with intent to distribute. And when you resist arrest and I have to use force, nobody is going to ask questions. You're just another statistic. Mark raised his heavy tactical boot, aiming it at the man's neck, intending to pin him to the dirt. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Sergeant, the man on the ground said. His voice wasn't trembling. It was as steady as the oak trees surrounding us. Shut up, Mark screamed, bringing his foot down. Mark, stop! I stepped out from the shadows, my phone held high, the recording light a tiny glowing red eye in the dark. I have it all, the forgery, the gambling debts, and now I have you planting evidence on camera. It's over. Mark spun around, his face a mask of pure murderous rage. He looked at me, then at the phone, then back at the man on the ground. For a second, I thought he might pull his gun on me. Sarah, give me that phone. You don't know what you're doing. You're sick, remember? You're having a breakdown. The only thing that's sick, Mark, is you, I said, my voice vibrating with a power I didn't know I possessed. The state troopers are 5 minutes out. Put the gun down. Mark laughed, a high, frantic sound. The troopers? By the time they get here, this vagrant will have attacked us both, and I'll have been forced to defend my wife. I'm the hero, Sarah. I'm always the hero. He turned back to the man on the ground, reaching for his holster. Last mistake, buddy. But the man on the ground didn't flinch. In one fluid, blurred motion, he wasn't kneeling anymore. He was up. He grabbed Mark's wrist with a grip that made the bone audibly pop, and before Mark could even gasp, he was slammed face first against the side of the shed. Special Agent Anthony Vance, FBI, the man said, his voice cutting through Mark's scream of pain. He pulled a concealed badge from under his olive jacket, not a local badge, but a gold shield that caught the moonlight. And for the record, Sergeant, I've been recording you since you first harassed me at the trailhead 3 weeks ago. We've been investigating this precinct for civil rights violations and corruption for 6 months. You just handed me the missing piece of the puzzle. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the distant, wailing approach of sirens. Mark's face was pressed against the rough cedar planks of the shed, his eyes wide and vacant. He looked like a trapped animal. My wife, Mark stammered, his voice weak. She's mentally unstable. She'll tell you. Your wife is the only reason you're not getting a bullet tonight. Agent Vance said, clicking a pair of heavy-duty steel handcuffs onto Mark's wrists. He looked at me, his expression softening. And she's a hell of a lot smarter than you gave her credit for. The next few hours were a blur of blue and red lights. The Blackwood estate was crawling with state troopers and federal agents. I sat on the porch swing, wrapped in a blanket, watching as they led Mark away in shadows. They found the burner phone. They found the ledger of his gambling debts in the trunk of his cruiser. And they found Evelyn, who had tried to flush the forged documents down the toilet, only to have the old Victorian plumbing betray her. As they put her into a separate car, she looked at me with a hatred so pure it should have burned. I didn't look away. I just raised my coffee mug in a silent, final toast to the woman who thought she could steal a lioness's den. 6 months later, the air in Oak Creek feels different. The rot Mark was so afraid of wasn't coming from the outside. It was bled out the night the FBI took him away. Mark is serving a 10-year sentence for civil rights violations, forgery, and official misconduct. Evelyn is facing a litany of conspiracy charges that will likely ensure she spends her remaining years in a very different kind of estate. The timberland is still there. The 50 acres of ancient trees stand tall, their leaves whispering in the autumn breeze. I spent some of the inheritance to set up a legal defense fund for victims of police misconduct in our county. A way to clean the stain Mark left on the badge. I'm sitting on the porch now, the same spot where I used to feel protected by a monster. The sun is setting, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. I realize now that safety isn't something a man gives you. It's not something you find in a locked door or a polished badge. True safety is the weight of your own truth and the strength to stand alone in the woods until the light returns. I looked at the drifter on the bench and saw a threat. I should have looked at the man in my bed. But the house is quiet now. The air is clear. And for the first time in my life, the Blackwood estate finally feels like home.